squeeze out the extra water on the edge of your brush. Oh, it looks like I didn't clean my brush very well because there's yellow on it. Ooh, bad teacher. Okay, squeeze it out. You want your small brush to be kind of like towel damp. I don't know about you, if you stepped out of your shower and you towel dry your hair, you're going to want it to be kind of that consistency of dampness because you want your color here to be as intense as possible. And in order to do that, you're going to use more paint and less water. Choose whatever paint you want for your bee. Heck, if you want a pink bee, go for it. If you want a bee the color of, I don't know, a booger, hey, it's your art. I'm not going to stop you. But you do want that color to be loaded enough on your paintbrush so that you can see it. And you literally just start outlining where your pencil line is for your yellow parts. I'm going to put this here so you have a guide. So in case you move faster than the teacher, you have the option of moving forward without having to wait for me. So get your flat wet with clean water, towel dry damp. You don't want it super damp, just enough to pick up this paint and spread it across your paper. Don't worry about your outline fading. You can always redraw it in. In fact, you know what? I might even need to pick up a little bit of that yellow because that yellow is, let me see. Yeah, I'm going to need to pick up, if you need to pick up a little yellow, that's fine too. My watercolor paper is actually behaving today. Most of the time, I literally have to be super careful with what I do because the darn paper won't follow the rules of watercolor paint. Repeat this step with anything that you want to be the color of yellow. So I'm going to do it with the body down here. Where's my... You're going to have to get your paint brush a little wet again and load up. See, look at all that paint. Yummy. Looks very appetizing. I love this technique because it allows you to have control over your shape. It helps you fill in your shape quickly, efficiently, with kind of like an even layer of color. And it's super helpful when you're doing realistic blending, and I'll show you here in a minute how to do blending. But first we got to get our filler shade down. We call this filler shade. When we fill in a shape with color, we call it filler shade because it fills the shape. Other teachers might call it something else, but that's what I call it. So whenever I say let's get our filler shade down, that's what I mean. Now with your crown or your tiara, whatever you've decided to draw up here, I would not use your big flat. I would switch to that medium flat. Specifically because it will allow you to move your brush around in a more accurate manner. It will let you color in here without getting out of the lines. So same rule applies. Damp, damp, damp. We got a lot of yellow things here. So the trick with watercolor blending is you first want to get your filler shade down, and then when that is dry, then you want to start adding that second layer of color. Just adding that second layer of color will appear a little bit darker than your first layer. Now, what if you're not sure if your paper is dry enough for this step? If you touch your paper and no paint is coming up onto your finger, and if your paper does not feel super cold, then usually that means it's safe to move forward. Now, when you put another layer of paint on your paper, you're building a shadow. If you feel like your shadow is too dark, do not fret. You can actually switch out to your flat, get it damp, and use that water to thin out your second layer. See how I thinned that out a little bit? So this I feel is too dark, so I'm going to thin it. Now, if you want an additional layer, you can check. See, look, I put my finger on there and paint is coming off. This is too wet for me to work with right now. I have to wait until it's dry. If you decide to keep adding paint, all you're going to do is move paint around. It's not going to stick because, well, watercolor, when it's wet, is fluid. It moves like water, so it doesn't usually stick very well. All right. For my honeycomb, however, since it's such a small shape, I'm actually going to use a little dots of brown. I'm going to get my surface wet so I can blend. And I'm going to use little little dots of brown to get that undershadowing. You see how that's kind of like more of a gold color? I am only going to do this with my honeycomb because it is so small. So those are two different ways that you can add shading. You can add an additional layer of the same color to increase the intensity and the thickness and the darkness of the color, or you can kind of add a darker color and mix it with your original color. You don't really want to use too much black when shading. That's going to muddy up your color. It's going to flatten your image. So just heads up on that. Now that we have our filler shade in for our yellow parts, you can actually go in with a damp brush, put some black on there, and start drawing in your facial features. I'm literally only going to go up to here for my antennae, specifically because, like I mentioned before, I don't want to have to play around or try to go around my antennae with my wash when I put my background in. I just don't want to do it. It's too much work. I like to do things simple. So I am going to add the rest of the antennae when my wash is down. Now that I have the right consistency, I'm going to outline my wings, and I'm going to repeat the drag and pull technique. I literally want kind of like a light gray color here for my wing. In fact, I might need, there we go. And if that means that my line fades out, that is okay with me. You know why? Because I can always redraw that outline back in. Paint around any other shapes. I'm not going to worry about painting over my arm, my pencil line for my arm, specifically because my black is going to overpower that area. This is how you can get a controlled gray. If you feel like you have way too much paint or way too much black on your paper, you can pick it up with a cloth. You can scoop it and put it in other areas. Totally up to you. Do not fret. There are solutions. I promise. There are solutions. This, I feel, has feathered out way too much, so I'm going to go in and redefine my outline. I used very little water here, so I feel comfortable moving forward. But if your water or your paper kind of looks shiny and wet, I would wait until this area dries before moving forward. Specifically because if you put paint on the area, it might create like a kind of like a spider web effect. You know how you get water on a piece of paper with ink wording on it and the ink kind of like has like a scrawly spider web look to it after it gets wet? That's what's going to happen here if your paper's too wet. So if you feel like it's too wet, just wait for this next step. I cannot see your paper, so I'm just going to assume that you are going to be the best judge for this scenario.